Innate Prejudice by James Bergman. There are many things in this life that can be chalked up to human instinct. The need to eat, defecate, and the urge to procreate all fall under the explanation of instincts. But how do we explain racism? Is prejudice instinctual, or is it something that is learned as we grow? If it is human instinct, does that mean that it is okay? If prejudice is learned, then can education be the key to a less racist society? When answered, these questions will point to the conclusion that by improving schools and promoting higher education and social tolerance, society can be improved, therefore greatly reducing, if not exterminating prejudice, and drastically improving intercultural communication. Is there such a thing as human instinct? For the longest time, the philosophical stance on this was that yes, we are born with a basic understanding of how the world works. It was this way up until philosopher John Locke introduced his idea of the tabula rasa, or the blank slate theory. Locke's blank slate theory was based on the stance that rather than being born with instincts or any knowledge of the outside world, instead we are born with absolutely no knowledge at all, and that all of our knowledge is derived solely from our senses. Basically, his belief was that we are born as a blank slate, and that it is only altered from this state when we are able to use our senses to learn truths about the world around us. However, if this were the case, then when a baby is born, it would have to see and learn how to suckle before being able to breastfeed. But, as read in Infant Vision, Birth to 24 months of age, babies' eyes do not develop enough to see more than a foot in front of them until they are at least 4 months old. Yet they know how to suckle the moment they are born, which proves that human instinct, in fact, does exist. Now that the question of is there human instinct is answered, one must answer the question of whether or not we are born with prejudice. Is it possible that racism is inherent in our DNA? Is it possible that just like suckling, racism comes naturally to human beings? That is precisely what neuroscientist Dr. Elizabeth Phelps of New York University set out to answer by observing the brains of a litany of people while they were being introduced to others of a different ethnic background. What they found was that those who are being monitored during this experiment would react subconsciously when introduced to those of a separate ethnic background. When shown pictures of people of a separate race than themselves, often the subject's amygdala, a part of the brain that is responsible for emotions, would light up. This goes along very well with the political philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, who believed that every person is born with an overwhelming drive for self-interest, and that very easily people are convinced of the ambitious rhetoric of others. However, even though we do have human instinct, this isn't what makes the most sense. Because if self-interest, prejudice, and racism are all inherent in our very physiology, then it would stand to reason that every single person would have an overwhelming selfish, prejudicial, and racist outlook on society, which simply isn't true. So, if we are not born racist, then it must be learned. Now that we have determined that humans are not inherently racist, the question of whether or not intelligence and education are linked to racial prejudice must be addressed. In an article by the Association of Psychological Science, one can see that scientists have been questioning this link between prejudice and intelligence for quite some time. In fact, several experiments and studies have already been performed, which most all seem to have the same findings: that intelligence and prejudice, including racism, are indeed linked. There were some bumps along the way, of course, as conducting accurate studies like this can be very difficult when scientists do not know every single one of the variables associated with each of the participants' upbringing. For instance, they don't know if maybe the participant has had a horrible experience with someone of a different race, or if their parents were simply racist, and that's how they were raised. Despite these difficulties, most of the tests have shown a clear link between prejudice and intelligence. In these studies, the scientists would evaluate the participants' intelligence levels in several ways. Once their intellectual capabilities have been noted, they would be asked a litany of questions pertaining to the people of a different race than their own. The evidence speaks for itself, with a very low amount of people who scored highly on the intelligence test responding in a prejudicial manner to the questions, and almost double the amount of people who scored low on the test responding in a prejudicial manner. While there still needs to be more studies and experiments to fully prove that there is a definitive link between prejudice and intelligence, it is enough evidence to shed light on the fact that it is a very good possibility. In conclusion, we as humans are born already knowing some things which we refer to as human instinct. While there are many things that we do that can be chalked up to human instinct, because not every single person is born showing signs of prejudice and racism, it does not seem to have any placement among these things. Furthermore, while it has been painstakingly difficult to research on this particular subject, studies show that prejudices, including racism, and intelligence may very well be linked together. And while it can't be said with certainty, all evidence points to this conclusion. Therefore, by improving education and the intelligence of society as a whole, we can greatly reduce the amount of people who exhibit prejudices based on race, which in turn will improve the social tolerance and acceptance of people of non-white racial backgrounds, and vastly improve intercultural communication as well.